This is my leech theory. Now, I've never read this anywhere, and I've never heard it referred to. So most of what I'm going to tell you is based on personal knowledge on the lakes and information that I've seen on videos and in articles. I remember seeing a photograph at one time, some years ago, of a fish's stomach. And in the photograph, actually it was the outside of the fish, in the photograph this fish was feeding on damselflies, and there were so many of them that they were actually crawling out of his stomach and crawling out through his gills. So it showed me that even though they do capture prey and they do go into their stomach, that in some cases they may be able to crawl out and actually escape from the trout. Interesting idea. Second, Brian Chin does a lot of fishing with chironomids and leeches. He has an interesting saying. He says that chironomids, the fish will eat chironomids for breakfast, but they love leeches for dessert. In many of his videos, they'll be fishing with chironomids for most of the morning, and then suddenly they'll change and start fishing with mini leeches and catching fish. So they fish chironomids, then leeches, and many times they'll switch back to chironomids and then they'll switch back to leeches. Interesting combination there. Now, Dave Hughes wrote an article about spring fishing, and he had the same concept. He was saying that if you want to use a two-fly rig, you should actually use a woolly bugger, which represents a leech, and a chironomid together, using both of them. He actually shows a stomach pump of the fish that they had been catching, and you would see chironomids and then a leech, chironomids and then a leech. So they were perfectly spaced. Brian Chin, when he did a stomach pump, it showed the same relationship. Chironomids, a leech, chironomids, a leech. And in most cases, the chironomids were still alive. So I thought, well, that's really kind of an interesting scenario. So I thought, okay, so that means that when there are insects hatching and available in large numbers, then the leeches will actually feed on those insects. So here's my first scenario. My partner and I were fishing Roslyn Lake when it was still a lake. And there was a guy in a float tube who said, hey, the caddis are feeding and hatching. And he says, oh, cool. So my partner told me, he says, hey, Cliff, we better go start using some caddis imitations because they're starting to hatch. And I said, oh, cool, you know. So he tied on a caddis and began to fish. And I thought for a moment, I said, now wait a minute. If the caddis are coming up above, there's a bunch of them down below. And down below, there should be leeches down there actually feeding on those caddis larvae. So I put on a green leech pattern. They were just above a weed bed, so I thought, that's what I should use as a green color. So we fished for I'm not sure how long until the hatch ended. My partner said, hey, I caught 26 fish. And I said, that's great. I caught 54. So I actually caught twice as many using a leech down below as he caught with the actual emerging pattern, up above. The second scenario, I was at a lake and moving along close to the shoreline, and the shoreline actually sloped down really, really steep. And I noticed a fish's mouth opening and closing, a pretty large fish. And you've seen it too, where you see a white thing suddenly moving and go, oh, what is that? And it's the inside of their mouth as they're opening and eating prey. I wasn't sure what he was eating until I saw damselflies flying away from the shore. Well, this is a circumstance you can't duplicate with a fly line. If I went to shore to try to bring these in, I'd have to drop them right down so close to this thing I'd probably spook him and wouldn't be able to do it. But I thought, okay, according to my theory of leeches, if damselflies are getting ready to emerge and massing in this area to move up, leeches should be there as well. So I put on a leech pattern, and I brought the pattern up over the weed beds, right parallel or horizontal to the fish, where he could see it as I moved it across in front of him. And I caught him. It was 19 inches. It was a really nice fish. But I turned around and put him back in. But I learned from that, okay, this is interesting. There's got to be more to this. So I began to wonder about a fish's stomach. In most cases, when you see a fish's stomach, you have the stomach, they swallow the insect and it goes into their stomach. Well, if they're alive and they start crawling back out and getting out of the gills, then the fish have to do something to keep them in there. I believe that they eat their insects, which some of them are still alive, and then they hunt down a leech. If they swallow a leech in here, the leech is large enough that you can actually protect the entrance to the stomach to keep them from going out. And it's a dark environment. That's perfect for a leech because he lives in dark environments, and he could actually feed on the insects inside the trout's stomach and keeping them from going out. Now, it's interesting that the fish will eat insects to a certain point, and then they'll put a leech in there. Once the leech is in, then they turn around and go back and feed on insects again. And at a certain point, they turn around and put in another leech. Exactly like the pattern that both Brian Chan and Dave Hughes showed in their articles and in their videos. For them, it was chironomids and a leech. This would be damselflies and a leech, damselflies and a leech. So every time there's a large a setup for flies that are hatching close to the bottom and coming up, like caddisflies, which actually sit either a foot or two above the bottom, just like chironomids, and then when they begin to emerge, up they come. Well, the leech's ability to identify the movement of these insects in mass is what brings them in so they can feed. And then the trout take advantage of the fact that the leech is present, and they actually swallow them to protect the food that's in their stomach and keeps the food from coming out. Now, like I said, I've never seen this theory published anywhere else, but I believe that's what's happening, because every time there's a good hatch going on and I use a leech, I outperform those who are actually using the insect as an emerger or on the surface. So there's my leech theory, something for you to think about. And you might try it yourself and see if it's successful for you, because boy, it sure has been successful for me.